coverage?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. The folks in St. Louis County made their voices heard last night, and my job today is to explain what comes next. St. Louis County's been living with a structural deficit in their budget now for over 15 years. The federal pandemic relief funds and the NFL settlement funds have patched things together, and they've kept us going for a while, but now we're running out of time. Without additional recurring revenue, we have about a year left before the NFL settlement funds run out, and we will no longer be able to operate county government normally without an additional source of revenue or significant painful budget cuts. Now, some members of the county council said that they were crossing their fingers hoping that Proposition U would pass. And I appreciate that they recognize the seriousness of the problem in front of us. But finger crossing is never a good financial strategy. The real consequences of this is that public safety makes up the vast majority of our budget. And if the council is unable to identify new sources of revenue, then public safety is where those cuts will happen. I even have heard Councilman Harder talk about cutting 90 police officers. We could lose 90 police officers. Others have talked about closing our parks. Some have talked about not having enough money to keep up with our roads and road repairs. These aren't scare tactics, that's math. And as the kids say, the math ain't mathing. Budgets don't care about politics. Revenue has to match our financial needs or expenditures for people to get the services they expect from county government. So I want the citizens of St. Louis County to understand something that gets lost in these conversations. This is not a spending problem. This is a revenue problem. This is a revenue crisis. Every year, asphalt costs more, equipment costs more, the salaries, competitive salaries for people in county government, they cost more. And if we want to get our road repaired done, then we need to have money for the materials and money for the equipment, and we have to have competitive salaries. If we want our parks to be open for your two-legged and four-legged children, then we need to have funding for the parks. If we want safe access to food and water in St. Louis County, then we need our public health department. If we want our police department to be responsive when folks call 911, then we have to pay competitive salaries for our police officers. And we have to be able to recruit and retain them. I'm especially proud of our police department in St. Louis County. Since we passed Proposition P in 2017, we built 3 new police stations, and we've significantly increased the salaries of our police officers to be competitive with our neighboring jurisdictions. We have a better police department because we've invested in them. We've invested in public safety, but the Proposition P funds are run out, and we're now running a $40 million deficit just in our police department, and that continues to grow. That's what happens when you invest in people. You need a sustained source of revenue to continue that. I've also heard suggestions that we could close the health department. I would invite anyone who believes that closing the health department is a good idea to spend some time in the health department. Sit in the waiting room with some of our seniors and some of our families who otherwise don't have access to health care, and tell them that they don't deserve health care. They should simply go without it. That's not our value system in St. Louis County. That's not who we are, and I definitely don't support that. We take care of our vulnerable neighbors in St. Louis County. So where do we go from here? I have 5 months left as county executive, and I will be talking about the budget a lot. This is an uncomfortable conversation, but folks in St. Louis County deserve to hear the truth. They do not deserve to have any false hopes. The council can use the authority that the voters have already given them to roll up property taxes in an assessment year next year to close the budget gap. They can put the use tax, the online sales tax, back on the ballot in November. The county council could even go back to the voters and ask them to redirect the youth sports fund, the tourism money for youth sports that's coming to St. Louis County at the end of this month. They could redirect that to patch the budget. These choices aren't easy, and they haven't changed. But you can't solve a 15-year structural deficit in the budget with change from the couch cushions. And I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Will you support putting this back on the November ballot, especially considering your opening remarks began with the voters have made their voices heard?
I would support putting this back on the ballot. The question is, would I support putting the use tax back on the ballot in November? I would, and I think the council would too. What needs to change is we need to spend some resources educating the voters on what it means and what service cuts mean in St. Louis County, because I don't believe the voters in St. Louis County want to cut public safety. And the biggest debt, the biggest deficit we have in St. Louis County is in our police department, and we can't keep going. The council approved educational funds, $300,000 to help voters understand the marijuana tax. The council approved $550,000 from the NFL settlement fund to put the Proposition B on the ballot to try and fire department directors who didn't do what they were told. The council should, if they want to see this passed, they should approve some money to help educate the voters on what it means to choose between cutting police officers or having an online sales tax like most local jurisdictions in St. Louis County.
Is the police department the area that likely is to get hit the most because of where it stands now with regard to their budget, or what are we looking at?
Well, I would invite everyone to take a quick look at the budget online on St. Louis County and see for yourself where the money goes. Over half, 60% of the budget goes to public safety in St. Louis County. Over half goes to funding the police department. And that's why we have a first-class police department in St. Louis County that we are extraordinarily proud of. And I have never been for cutting public safety, and that's where we're headed if we don't have a new source of revenue. You can't make up this difference by cutting funds from the jail, from cutting our health department, our restaurant inspections, our community pool inspections. We're not going to be able to cut road repairs any more than we've already cut. There is nowhere to go other than where most of the budget already goes, and that's in public safety, and I am against cutting the police department. And that's what this conversation is going to be about. We need a new source of revenue. We either need to roll up the property tax like the voters have already given the council approval to do, they just have to vote for it, or we need this use tax to pass, and we need to get serious about telling the voters what it's about.
Are you surprised by what happened in the election with this effort?
With the use tax?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm not surprised because we did not spend any resources at all explaining to the voters what's happening here. And we have an affordability crisis in our country because of the war. And everything costs more, gas costs more, and it's very difficult to ask voters for more money without a clear explanation of what it's for when we have a crisis already in affordability in our country.
The reorganization of the Regional Sports Authority, that will bring the county a new revenue source. Will it not?
Yeah, the question is about the reorganization of the Regional Sports Authority and the Convention and Visitors Commission, known as Explore St. Louis. They now will become one entity with one board. All of the hotel motel tax from St. Louis County will flow directly to them without passing through county government anymore. And part of that process is a one-time fund, one-time revenue source of $55 million. One-time funds will flow back to St. Louis County. And those funds are restricted for tourism. They're restricted for tourism because that tax was passed over 30 years ago by a ballot question that said, can we use this money for tourism? And the voters in St. Louis County said yes. If the county council wants to redirect that to patch the budget and take that money away from the youth sports fund, which is what we spent our tourism money for in St. Louis County in the past, then they have to go back to the voters and say, we'd like to use this money for something else. And that's a tough decision that the council's going to make.
Back to the online sales tax. You mentioned you want an informational campaign using county money. I'm curious, do other politicians need to put up campaign cash to actually advocate for this position? Does there need to be a PAC involved to actually more aggressively advocate for the county?
Well, if there's going to be a persuasion campaign, then that can't be government funds. And we've done this in Missouri for decades. Governments can spend some of their resources explaining what happens if this question passes and what happens if it does not pass. A persuasion campaign has to be campaign funds, and the realtors and the municipal league were involved in that, and they did some of that, a modest amount of persuasion. I think they were sincere in their efforts. They didn't have a lot of resources, but the voters did not accept that. This is a tough environment to be trying to ask for new revenue. It always is when gas prices are skyrocketing and food prices are skyrocketing, and we're in a financial stress in our community and affordability crisis because of the war.
Did you consider helping the realtors and the Muni League out in August with some of your remaining campaign funds, helping support that campaign?
Well, I do have some funds left. They're modest, and they'll be used for other purposes. I think what we really need is several $100,000, because this is a real communication gap that we have here, and we have to explain. And I think more people in the community will commit to this question, because it's going to be crystal clear that our choice is cutting police services and laying off county employees and police officers, or finding a new source of revenue to pay for the police department.
And if it goes back on the November ballot, you've got one candidate for county executive who opposed putting it on the August ballot, and would presumably oppose putting it on the November ballot, and then another candidate that didn't really articulate a position either way on the August question. So are those automatically kind of two strikes against what they could face in November?
I don't think either one of them would refuse to accept either. There's no one running for county executive that would refuse a new revenue stream to keep our police department intact. However they talk about it during the campaign cycle is up to them. But I don't think they would refuse to accept a stable revenue stream, something that we've needed for 15 years in St. Louis County.
You mentioned a property tax raise. Would even taking it all the way to the cap get to the county where they need to be?
The question is there enough room in the property tax levy that's already been approved by the voters? I think it would make a big difference. I don't think it would completely solve the budget gap, but it would make a big difference. And it would be able to keep us from laying off police officers, I believe.
Do you know how much extra revenue that would add?
I don't.
If, setting aside the possibility of this passes in November, what kind of impact does this have on the perspective of St. Louis County and St. Louis City merging in some form? Do you think this jeopardizes it if the county financial situation isn't in better shape?
So the question is about the St. Louis City re-entering St. Louis County as one of our municipalities and maintaining their normal functions as a city government. And what the budget crisis in St. Louis County does to that question. I think the budget crisis in St. Louis County helps us understand that the way governments operate, the way governments deliver services require money, requires funds. And we're in an extraordinary inflationary environment. Over the past 5 years, it costs more money for us to buy stuff. It costs more money for us to pay our employees, and we can't provide the same amount of services with the money we have. So we either cut services, we find new revenue, or we find a more efficient way to deliver those services. And restructuring how county and city interact is one way to lower the cost of providing critical services. We're already looking at shared service agreements with St. Louis City. Now we're looking at shared service agreements with our libraries, with emergency operations, with information technology, with our health departments. Those are relatively straightforward ways to save some money. I can't give you a dollar figure on that, but I can promise you it costs less to deliver services on a larger scale than it does on a smaller scale. And the next county executive will be a part of a conversation that is gaining momentum in the community to look at ways to save money, to deliver our services at less cost, and hopefully limit some of the need for new revenue. But we're still going to need new revenue to provide the services that people are used to getting in St. Louis County. People live in St. Louis County because they get good services. They have a great police department. They can usually get what they need out of county government. Now, the budget cuts this year have strained our Department of Revenue. There's a 6-month wait to get your RETA documents, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, get your documents from St. Louis County so you can apply for that. It's going to take a long time to process all of our senior property tax freeze applications. The services aren't quite as prompt as people are used to getting, but they still get reliable services from St. Louis County. And if we're going to continue that, then we're going to need a new source of revenue.
So you say you think an education campaign would help, but we still have these same crisis in the area, whether it's gas, whether it's food. Do you think people would better understand the need that we're talking about here? Or how do you think that would persuade people perhaps?
Well, so the question is about an education campaign. We need folks to come together and understand what's at stake. And if we can get this over the hump in November, if we can get a new source of revenue by November, that's great. We've got about a year or so left of NFL funds to keep normal operations of county government going. So if we don't get it passed in November, we'll come back in April and ask again. We have to continue this conversation. We need a new source of revenue, either use tax or property tax, or we're going to be laying off police officers in St. Louis County within a year or a year and a half. And we can wait until that moment comes, but if a use tax passes, it's still 6 months before the money comes in to have an impact. And you can only roll up property taxes in odd-numbered years. So that's a next year question. So if you don't get a use tax or property tax increase next year, then a year and a half from now, everything crashes. I'm not going to be county executive in a year and a half, but I don't want to see things crash. And we got to be talking about it right now.
Thoughts on Jake Zimmerman winning the Democratic primary?
Jake made a good argument for why he is prepared to be county executive, and I think he'll be a good county executive.
Maybe some of the other results that we saw last night.
Well, I know both candidates who ran for assessor, and Doug Clemens made a good argument, and I think he's prepared. He has the right background in education, and he will be a good assessor. And having Jake around as county executive, I'm sure Jake will help onboard him.
Do you endorse Jake, or will you, or?
Oh, I support the Democratic nominee for county executive. I support Jake Zimmerman, and I support the entire Democratic ticket in St. Louis County, and that's my position. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.